The media wanted a puppet, but she brought the scissors. They said stick to the script. She said, what script? She faced dictators, exposed corruption, and survived more hit pieces than a reality TV star. And somehow she's still standing. Censored? Yep. Blacklisted? Of course. Going away quickly? Not a chance in hell. Now she's back, rogue, relentless, and ready to blow the lid off everything they don't want you to know. It's Going Rogue with Lara Logan. Because if telling the truth makes you dangerous, then she's the most dangerous woman in journalism. Brace yourselves. This is gonna be fun.
Welcome to Rogue Roundtable with Lara Logan and Luke Coffey, my eminent co-host. What am I starting with today? Okay, so there's something that's obviously on a lot of people's minds, and that is accountability. When is this administration going to start holding people accountable? By one article that I read said that the Biden administration had arrested around 450 people at this point in its first term. So that's frustrating, and people are losing. They're not losing faith yet, but there's definitely a growing swell of opinion, and emotion that's coming from people that are saying, why isn't this happening? A lot of it's getting directed at Pam Bondi, some of it at Kash Patel. This is what I can tell you. I share that frustration. But at the same time, I don't believe, from my experience, advocating for people to be fired and pulled out of those positions is precisely what the enemy wants. And why do I say that? Well, look at the two people that are most under attack. Would you agree it's Pam Bondi and Pete Hegseth? Okay, so look at the two agencies that are most important for accountability. That would be the Department of Justice and the Department of Defense. So it's not that there's no merit to demanding and wanting accountability. It's not that it isn't important to keep putting on that pressure. What it is more that when I try to understand what are the layers, that's one layer, and that's, very valid. But in information warfare and in a covert war like this, people will take something that's valid. It has real merit to it, and they'll use it for their own design. So what do we see here? Well, if the president were to fire the Attorney General or the Secretary of Defense, what happens then? I'll tell you what happens. The entire agency is paralyzed. Everything stops. And then he has to find someone to replace them with. And as we saw in the first term, there's absolutely no guarantee that the person he picks is going to be better than the one you just got rid of. I mean, Mike Johnson replaced Kevin McCarthy. How'd that work out? Okay, so you get the point. So what happens next is now you have to have a candidate. They have to go through confirmation hearings. They'll drag those out. Then they start, if they get through, then they start from scratch in that agency. And so you lose literally 2, 3, 4 months out of the agenda. Well, how many months do we have left before the midterms? How much time is actually on the clock for Trump before other things intervene? When you break it down like that, it really isn't a lot considering the scale of this. So what I would urge people out there is when you're looking at this, I know it's frustrating, and more than frustrating, it's slightly terrifying, actually, because it's very obvious that what we've done on, say, for example, government corruption, you turn the tap off, but the tap is still there. The sink, the water pipes, the reservoir of corruption, of ideology that drove that fraud, waste, and abuse, that's all still there. And these people have made it very obvious their tactics are disturb, and destroy, right? Disrupt, disturb, destroy. That's literally the playbook. So how do they do that? Well, they do that with subversion and with infiltration. And it's, what we're learning more and more, and brings me to what I want to talk about first, Luke Coffey, is there's a great article by a good friend of mine, Alexander Muse. He's at Amuse on X, if you want to find it, about Susan Rice and the hidden resistance. So when you get frustrated which is understandable. What I would urge you to do is, rather than channel your frustration at, say, for example, Pam Bondi, channel your frustration at doing something about what you're mad about. Waiting for the grown-ups to fix it all is not a strategy, okay? It's definitely not a winning strategy. And why do I say this? Well, look at this article on Susan Rice and the hidden resistance. You probably saw that there was a big story that Susan Rice was on the defense board, and Pete Hegseth responded to that news by getting rid of everybody on the board. And you might have been scratching your head thinking, what does any of that mean, and do I care, right? Well, these things are really important, and what they amount to is that all the people you thought you had voted out of office are effectively, in some capacity, still in office, because they're still having a say in what's really going on. What do you think, Luke?
Well, I think you opened my eyes to a couple points. One being, like, for instance, I brought up, the chatter is, Pam Bondi, she's done over 50 interviews. We want to see perp walks. We want to see, the guilty, just as a January 6er, I was already on an FBI poster by now, and looking at a, prison term. So
of 20, 25 years.
Yeah. So I think we, like you said, this is information warfare. Why are they, the enemy, the other side could be bringing up these stories to make us focus on that, hyper-focus and demand.
Well, they would love nothing more than Trump to fire Pam Bondi. Right. And then maybe they get, they get someone who is actually a Manchurian candidate, right? Exactly. Who's actually working for the other side,
right? To
replace her, And what I say is, not that you don't have a legitimate right to question what she's doing or to keep the pressure on, but if people were being arrested and charged with treason, you wouldn't care how many interviews Pam Bondi had done, would you?
No, not at all. Like some good comments under your post today was, Steve Ferguson said, until the deep state bad actors are severely punished, this will continue.
Which post was this?
This is the article you posted.
When I posted Alex's article?
Yes, you posted Alex's article, and this is Susan Rice isn't just a diversity of thought hire. She's a Trojan horse for the deep state. She's a saboteur since day one, hiding behind fake expertise.
Yeah. Look, Studio Dog wants to get out.
And this is Mag 1775. He said every patriot needs to understand you can't negotiate with cancer. You cut it out before it kills the host. But that's a process, as you're saying, right?
Well,
I think the 3D, their 5D chess, people are, getting a little tired of that term or whatever. There's stuff going on behind the scenes. Be patient. We want to see results, but in the same way, you've made a good point that, this does take time. They're building cases.
And I'm not even saying it takes time, right? Obviously it does.
Right.
But all I'm saying is, if you want to keep the pressure on, screaming about firing Pam Bondi or Pete Hegseth or something is not going to keep the pressure on.
Right.
That plays into the hands of your enemy, and that gives them an opportunity to further cripple your agenda. And it also doesn't give you a guarantee that you're going to get the right person in. What it does is give them time. And remember, like, what I think is really significant is that in the beginning of this administration, they didn't know that Trump was going to win. They cheat, and so they thought they had the fix was in. And I know because I know from. Well, I just know that there were votes that were inserted from abroad that didn't make their intended targets, that didn't reach them because good people stopped them from cheating. So, yes, did Trump overwhelm them at the polls and all of that? All of that is true, but it took a massive effort to overturn the fraud in the last election. And so people are frustrated and they want to see their agenda implemented, and they need to keep that pressure on. But how do you direct that pressure? Isn't it much easier to just, call for Pam Bondi to be fired than it is to actually exercise your constitutional rights and do your due diligence and pressure your representatives, to hold them to the job they were hired to do? That's what you want, right? You want them to do the job they're supposed to be doing.
Yes, but let's talk about Susan Rice. Okay, like why is she still a part of this system? You know, where I think if she was on the other foot, and this was, Democrats were back in power, every Republican would be immediately.
They'd be gone.
Be gone.
Yeah,
so what's the?
Well, it's a good question, and
Okay.
I tell you what I've been learning as I've been looking into this is that I think prior to Obama, we had the Bushes, the Clintons. I mean, there wasn't that much separating these people, right? In fact, as we're learning more and more, they look more like they're part of the same team.
Right.
When Obama came in, he began to implement a very different agenda. I did not realize it. I was one of many people that did not realize it at the time. There's things that Obama did, like one of his last executive orders, signing over ownership of the internet to the global community.
Right.
That's now the one world government, right? And at the time, I didn't understand that. But Obama was really an operational phase where they're moving to implementing a very different America, right? And they didn't expect Trump to win the first time. So you had a lot of people in those offices, they might have been the bulk of the civil service may lean Democrat, but you didn't have as many hardcore operatives that seemed to have really entrenched themselves
And infiltrated
during the Biden years. Why are so many young people struggling to have babies today? Birth rates in the US are at record lows, and that's partly because testosterone levels are dropping all the time. According to some studies, T levels are roughly half of what they were 50 years ago. And if we don't reverse this trend, we could be looking at population collapse. And it's why we partnered with Chalk. They're a Patriot-owned supplement company, and their mission is to save mankind from extinction. They have something called the Male Vitality Stack, and it's been shown in clinical trials to boost your free testosterone by 87% in just 21 days. That is not just a statistic. You will feel it. And ladies, you'll be pleased to know it's not just for men. The Female Vitality Stack addresses just about every complaint a woman can have: stress, mood, hormones, energy, and focus. And it'll even help you keep up with your man. So go to chalk.com and use code LARA for 17.76% off your subscription. Cancel anytime. Or you can also call 50CHOQ3000 and tell them Lara sent you. I mean, okay, here's a sample of what we're talking about, right? Because, Susan Rice is exposed for being on the defense board, and Hegseth rightly gets rid of the whole board. That's it. He's not even playing around. However, it's much worse than that. It's not just the Defense Department. It is, look, according to Alex and his reporting, he says, when I dug deeper, the findings were no less alarming. At the State Department, Thomas Donnellan, I mean, come on, are you kidding me? He was Barack Obama's national security advisor. Yeah. So he continued to co-chair the Foreign Affairs Policy Board. Yeah. Why is Tom Donnellan on the Foreign Affairs board? I mean, policy board. The board should be implementing the policies of the president who has been elected, not of previous administrations. And then you've got who's serving alongside him because he's the co-chair. Oh, look at this, Cecilia Munoz, right? And she is another alum of the Obama White House, celebrated in progressive circles for her progressive domestic policy advocacy. Okay, that's not all. The Intelligence Board, who have we got there? Oh, Janet Napolitano, remember her? Obama's DHS secretary, right? And then who else there? House Intelligence. Wait, no, did I get that right? Situation. Yeah, she's the intelligence. Janet Napolitano. Yeah. And then you have who? You have Evan Bay, another Democrat. And then Jane Hartman, California Democrat. These are all on
radical Democrat loyalists.
Yeah, exactly. And that's intelligence.
Well, and then just the danger with this is, as she points out, these advisory boards aren't just giving advice. They frame policy options, influence narratives, and can sabotage, the America First agenda, Trump's agenda, under the guise of expertise. It's not oversight. It's slow motion. It's a slow motion coup.
Here's another article that Alex wrote today. He says, what is it, what is the meaning of this? Well, the Federal Accounting Standards Advisory Board. Federal Accounting Standards Advisory Board, right? I mean, that's the kind of thing that we don't even want to think about. FASAB. In 2018, what did they do? They issued an administrative rule. This has been exposed by Doge. So what did that administrative rule do? This was not a law passed by Congress. It allows any federal agency to modify its financial statements in order to obscure sensitive national security information. Okay, so that sounds reasonable. Oh, you don't want sensitive national security information there being exposed in your financial statements, right? The authority extends beyond the obvious domains of intelligence or defense, touching every department that produces general purpose federal financial reports, from guess where? USAID to the Department of Energy.
Right.
Okay, so in theory, it's meant to stop your enemies from learning about state secrets, right? In practice, what does it do? Alex writes, it creates a black hole into which billions of taxpayer dollars vanish without a trace. So what do advisory boards mean, and how much do they matter? They matter.
Yeah.
This is a big deal. This is not small. And although Pete Hegseth did the right thing, we've yet to hear about any of these other boards and other agencies. Okay, Marco Rubio, what are you doing? Okay, Tulsi Gabbard, let's see it. What's happening, in the intelligence world? And what about Kristi Noem and DHS?
Right.
I mean, you'd want every one of them. Scott Bassett, let's go.
But the importance of, as we talk about a lot, we're in information warfare. I mean, this is, fourth, fifth, generational warfare, and an uninformed public is not aware of who these people are, and that's why it's important, for articles like this, and to know who, Janet Napolitano is, and all that these are operatives that are
these are political operatives from previous administrations who
that are still in place. And they're counting on the American public to overlook these boards and not be informed, and so
I didn't know these boards existed. I didn't know what their power was before last week. I mean, you kind of, vaguely you have a sense of it, but seriously, I mean, who knows about this?
Yeah, I mean, and that's this is why it's important, what would you say? How do we combat this information? I mean, finding out this
you
information.
Do exactly what Pete Hegseth did.
Yeah.
You fire them all.
Right.
You start from scratch. You get rid of every single one of them. Yeah. And
you dig out the cancer, right? I mean, you have to dig it out.
I was talking to Ivan Raiklin this weekend, and he was like, why did they not get lists of who's vaccinated and who's not vaccinated across the federal government? Right. Let's start right there. You want to know who to you really want to start with who's there to subvert your government. Find out who forced other people to get vaccinated.
Right.
And forced out the people who were vaccinated. Because that's a good place to start looking for who your enemies really are.
Right.
Now, you pointed out that there were a bunch of things happening that no one's paying attention to.
Well, there's, DC is not just a problem. There's a global pattern of cover-ups. We have three major events that the mainstream media is not even touching,
and most journalists, quite frankly, it's not even the mainstream media, right? Yeah. There's so much coming at you these days with information. It's it's hard to keep up.
Yeah, and I mean, and just as tactics of information warfare, we talked about, obviously they put celebrity stuff out there, but also they made a big deal about Trump, wearing a blue suit.
You're going to go on about the blue suit again?
Well, no, I'm just saying.
You love this story.
No, but I'm saying you pointed out that they this is a tactic of the enemy, whatever, to basically project or highlight a story that's a non-story.
Create it.
Yeah, create it.
They literally created it out of nothing.
If you dig deeper, this is why people just read a snapshot of a headline and just go with it. But there were dozens of people wearing blue suits, but they point out that he was at the Pope's
including, I think,
funeral.
Joe Biden, right?
Yeah. But of course, they get the photo where they just see him in the blue suit next to everybody wearing black, and
warfare.
You're supposed to wear dark, and so they make that such a story. Yeah. And so people are, now we're having to combat this story versus talking about real news.
It's ridiculous,
right?
Yeah. It's absolutely ridiculous and frustrating because this is where they win. Every minute that we spend talking about what color was Trump's suit at the Pope's funeral is a minute that we're not focused on accountability, which really matters, right?
Exactly.
And the same applies for the Trump administration. So some of these tactics are designed, even if they lose, this was easily exposed, right? They lost and people could see that there were other people wearing blue suits.
Right.
But it doesn't matter, because on the one hand, they're preaching to the converted, all the Trump haters.
Oh, yeah.
So they're like, oh, that's another thing he did. And they're not reading, or watching the programs that are showing you that it was nonsense, right? So they never debunk the false narrative in their world, in their feedback loop of information.
Right.
But then also, every single moment that the Trump administration spends addressing that is a victory for them. They're tying them up in knots.
Yeah.
Stole. Disrupt.
Right.
Yeah.
And I mean, that's why it's important to verify, to dig and amplify the truth in this time, because there is so much deception, and that's why, that's a role as Joe Citizen can take is not just accepting the narrative that's out there on
question everything.
Question everything.
And everyone.
Do your own research.
Including us. Yeah. Definitely question us.
Question us. Do your own research. Yeah. And that's why, I mean, that's we should be critical thinkers. And George Carlin talks about, and maybe, you can roll this clip, but he talks about that.
Are you talking to Keith?
Keith. Yeah, Keith, hey Keith, how you doing?
Don't forget about me.
Yeah. I like your new hat, by the way. Yeah, I love your new hat.
I think you know where he got that.
It's my new look.
He got it from.
What kind of hat is that?
That's a Panama Jack hat. That's
it's not a cowboy hat. No, it's not.
No, it isn't. And it fits him nicely.
And where did we get that Panama hat?
We got that in Panama, and we have some upcoming.
Yeah, we're gonna have a week of special coverage.
Yeah, amazing coverage from Panama.
Rogue on the road.
We went on the road down to Panama, and it was wild. So.
Well, we went there though for a serious reason.
We did.
One, to see what's really happening in the Darien Gap, which has been a major route for illegal immigration into the U.S., and two, to get a first-hand look at the canal, and what's going on there. So that's coming up.
Well, what I was saying is George Carlin, one of his last, years in stand-up, he was kind of revealing truths. Big truths, and he said,
"It's a reason for this. There's a reason education sucks, and it's the same reason that it will never, ever, ever be fixed. It's never going to get any better. Don't look for it. Be happy with what you got, because the owners of this country don't want that. I'm talking about the real owners now. The real owners, the big wealthy business interests that control things and make all the important decisions. Forget the politicians. The politicians are put there to give you the idea that you have freedom of choice. You don't. You have no choice. You have owners. They own you. They own everything. They own all the important land. They own and control the corporations. They've long since bought and paid for the Senate, the Congress, the state houses, the city halls. They got the judges in their back pockets, and they own all the big media companies, so they control just about all of the news and information you get to hear. They got you by the balls. They spend billions of dollars every year lobbying to get what they want. Well, we know what they want. They want more for themselves and less for everybody else. But I'll tell you what they don't want. They don't want a population of citizens capable of critical thinking. They don't want well-informed, well-educated people capable of critical thinking. They're not interested in that. That doesn't help them. That's against their interest. That's right.
The neocons, the controllers, want a uneducated populace. They want just sheeple that just accept. Yeah, of course.
They all do, both sides.
Both sides.
How else can you explain why teachers are forced to alter grades and pass kids who cannot read?
They want people that can memorize and repeat and not critically think.
They want people who can be manipulated.
Yeah, yes, exactly. And just repeat the same algorithms that's coming up in their feed. And that's why it's important to look outside
in their feedback loop.
In a feedback loop.
That's tailored to the individual.
Yes. And you speak against AI all the time, and that's what's happening to all, we can get in this feedback. You do.
They don't know that.
Well, she does speak out against it, doesn't she, Keith? She does. What does she say? I want
you to do your own work.
Yeah, she does. And there is a lot of truth behind what she says, and that's being revealed. It's the devil's toolbox, and he's got a lot of...
Satan's way of mimicking the omnipotence of God
is
technology.
You heard it
and
first
AI.
here, folks. So it's very true. I agree with that, but people are using it. With
I know
everything.
it does a lot of good things. I understand that.
God can use good, use it for good, and what Satan uses for evil.
I just want us to remember that as humanity is exterminated.
Exactly, when the robots start attacking us.
But the AI helped me write my midterm.
I know. Thanks for thanks AI.
Yes, thank you AI for all you've done for me as you slaughter and remove human beings from the face of the earth.
And put a chip in our brain. Thanks, Elon. But there's
What were the three things we picked?
The three things that we wanted to show, that it's just wild to me that this is barely touching the radar, the hemisphere of mainstream events that are happening worldwide. Let's start with there's a Iran.
Iran. There is no
Iran.
You're fired. There is no country called Iran.
Iran, is that where it is? Is that over in the Middle East, Egypt there?
It's Iran.
It's Iran. It's Iran.
Somebody
there was
help
a
me.
port
God
explosion in Iran.
Iran, otherwise known as Iran.
Iran, yes.
Okay.
Well, let me give you the info on it. It happened
Container ships?
on April 26th. Two massive explosions hit Iran's ports. Bandar Abbas, the largest, saw at least 65 deaths and over 750 injuries.
65 deaths.
Shahid Rajahi reported 28 dead, 800 injured. And some sources suggest missile fuel was involved.
You know what this reminds me of? You remember that explosion in the port in Lebanon, right?
Oh, yeah.
There's something going on here because that is crazy aftermath. I mean, I've seen a lot of bombs and up close, right? I'm not just talking about in videos. And look at that. That is incredible. And so at first they said, right, that this was cargo that had come on container ship from China, and that it had been mislabeled. Mm-hmm. And then one of the Iranian government officials came out and said, no, this is Israel. So, I mean, we don't know the truth yet. Everything gets blamed on Israel over there. Some of it is Israel. Some of it's the U.S.
And Iran's ports are critical for oil and trade. And a blast disrupts their economy and military supply lines. That's what they're talking about. The missile fuel theory is linked to sodium perchlorate, suggests it's either a mishap or a targeted strike. But what's interesting is Reuters and BBC reported it, yet it's not trending. But the question is why? Why is it not trending? Is it because it makes, is Iran the bad guy narrative, complicates that? Or
I don't think it complicates that. Okay. I don't know why it's not trending. It suggests suppression.
Yeah.
Sometimes that can be because we're so focused inward or there's information overload. But here's what I do know about Iran. They're in trouble. Mm-hmm. And I've been tracking this for about a year. Iran is in big trouble, and they're not in a strong position right now. The mullahs in Tehran have faced repeated and ongoing consistent opposition by the Iranian people, which is staggering to me. I have to say, Iranian women are among the bravest in the world. Yeah. I follow the opposition a lot. It gets very little coverage. I try to put stuff out. I would urge people to, if they're interested in global events, to follow what's happening with the Iranian opposition. What happens to women inside, men and women, but Evin prison, where they put a lot of the political prisoners in Iran, is just, it's harrowing.
Right.
And so, and there are a lot of indicators on the global stage that things are dramatically shifting, and the lines across the world are being redrawn. Right. Just like when you look at tariffs, everybody's whining about what their goods are going to cost, or very worried because the businesses are going under or whatever. But what they're not looking at is the realignment of global relationships.
Right.
And what that really means, because what the U.S. is going to do is follow up those tariffs with direct foreign investment from the United States government to build up the countries that negotiate and that make deals and whatever. And the ones that are like China, go to hell.
Right.
Well, we're probably already in an undeclared war.
I mean, China. You being Lara Logan and very, keen on world news and being an encyclopedia. Yeah. I'm your everyman, by the way. Do you believe, even Iran's own minister hinted at the past sabotage attempts. Was this an accident or was this attack?
Well, you know how I am about that.
If you're a betting woman.
But I'm not.
I know, but if you were.
But I'm not.
I know, but.
So I won't be.
Okay.
No.
All right.
No.
There we go, folks.
This is what I would tell you about that is probably does my gut tell me that was an accident?
There's a lot of accidents happening across the world.
This is not an accident. I would find that hard to believe, but I have zero evidence to support that.
Right.
So you're asking me my gut feeling, my instinct based on past. My instinct is that is not, but that was my instinct with Lebanon too.
Right.
I would urge people to look at those, look at those videos, look at them side by side. I mean, those are just apocalyptic scale explosions. And I do know that homemade explosives, there's a lot of different things that can cause explosions on that kind of scale,
right?
And which is interesting because we think only of nuclear as being having that level of devastation, and it almost looks nuclear at the level of devastation. But I'm not on the ground, and I'm not in the know. Mm-hmm. What I would say to you is this: definitely, Iran is one to watch because
keep your eye on Iran.
Yes, and
how do you say it?
Iran. I say Iran.
Can I say Iran?
You can say whatever the hell you want.
I just want to make sure.
It's a free country, right? First Amendment and all that.
Potato.
Tomato.
Okay.
Let's call the whole thing off.
Let's do it.
Okay. So next, what's related to that? The other video that I stumbled across that was just is pretty astonishing to me too, which is Iran's proxy, the Houthis in Yemen, who have
been... And you know a lot about them.
Well, I know a bit about them. But they have been, since October 7th, they came into the war on behalf of Hamas and the Iranians and Hezbollah, and they've been firing at U.S. ships in the Suez Canal and Israeli vessels and so on. What's significant about this is not that the U.S. gets all its goods from the Suez Canal, but that the U.S., as we reported, remember our show with Ross Kennedy?
I do remember it.
On maritime trade routes in China.
Which you can check out on our YouTube page.
And I would urge people to do that. I think it's a really important interview.
If you miss it.
Yes, if you missed Ross Kennedy's interview, don't miss it.
Yeah.
So what did Ross talk about? What did we talk about? One of the things is that the U.S. is the world's maritime policeman, right? And keeping all of those shipping routes open for all these other nations. Well, in the Suez Canal, Biden took the Houthis off the terrorist list, which, by the way, is usually a very difficult thing to do. I mean, I think the Iranian opposition spent 30, 40 plus years trying to get off the terrorist list. It's not easy to do. Biden took the Houthis off, Trump put him back on, and he has been doing a lot in, you can look at his statements, actually. He's been pretty forceful in his statements to the Houthis. So this whole thing is going on.
Right.
And we're not even paying a whole lot of attention to it. And when I saw this video, I thought, holy guacamole. Take a look.
Let's roll that.
And this was filmed by Turkish sailors.
Well, and again, for backstory, on the 28th, the suspected U.S. airstrike hit a migrant detention center in Yemen, killing 68.
Oh, wait, what are you talking about? They said that this was a strike on the port. So we don't know that. That's
what this is reported. No?
Okay, well, see, this is the age of information warfare, but that is definitely a ship. Okay, and that is definitely a port. And I don't know of any migrant detention centers that are floating on the water.
Well, the Houthis attacked Red Sea shipping, so the U.S. says they're protecting trade, but civilian deaths are piling up.
Sure, civilian deaths are piling up. Take a look.
And the world's barely blinking, so that's the whole point. Is like,
okay, but did they hit the port and the ships, or did they hit a migrant detention center? Those are very different things.
That's true.
Got to get it right on this show, Luke.
Yeah, I know. I don't have that. Similar footage from shows Ross Isa oil tanks burning after U.S. bomb hits.
Okay, so that's a classic example of information warfare where you're left like, not knowing. Now, the U.S., that strike on a migrant detention center may be real. It may not be, but, we haven't investigated it, so we don't know. But I do know that the U.S. has been it's been in basically a war to keep the Suez Canal open. And that, by the way, benefits not the United States, but Europe and and Egypt, Israel, Jordan. I mean, that's, very important trade route for that region, just like the Panama Canal is to the U.S.
It is, and we learned a whole lot about that you will also get to learn about, folks.
I think we want to do a whole show on the U.S. as the world's maritime police force, because it's costing the U.S. taxpayer billions of dollars, and nobody seems to factor that into the whole tariff conversation and so on.
Yeah. We're going to skip on to, there were rolling blackouts across Europe today. Let's watch this video.
This is a boring video.
Well,
the story is not boring.
Well, listen to who pipes in, who warned us of.
Okay, so Spain, Portugal, these are the European countries, right?
Yep.
Who have been affected by this.
Frightening scenario of a comprehensive cyber attack, which would bring to a complete halt to the power supply, transportation, hospital services, our society as a whole. The COVID-19 crisis would be seen in this respect as a small disturbance in comparison to a major cyber attack.
Okay, so the World Enslavement Forum amazingly predicted a worldwide epidemic. It was amazing. It was incredible. It's like they have the crystal ball.
Agenda 21, didn't they even do an exercise for it?
Oh, yeah. They did a drill preparing for what could be a potential worldwide epidemic. Then, surprisingly, an epidemic hit 3 months later. That changed the world and changed how we look at life, I think. And now this guy, this is a while back. This was in 2020. You have to make me
listen to Klaus Schwab.
Klaus Schwab, who, did he just step down?
Yes, he did. He did.
Yeah,
he looks like have the shoulder pads.
He looks like a supervillain, from the future. And he talks like it, and he's probably got some, and he does, I believe, have some Nazi roots, But
well, the thing about Klaus Schwab is, it's interesting to see that he's being investigated, right, for inflating the numbers on climate change. So that is, that's incredibly significant, actually, because these rolling blackouts that went from Portugal and Spain to the big cities that have been affected: Madrid, Barcelona, Lisbon, France, Brussels, put into some parts of France and Andorra. They are now saying that the cause of this is some kind of rare climate phenomenon. Yeah, which is nice try, World Enslavement Forum.
Perfect for the climate narrative, right?
Yeah.
It's going to be more of these happening. It's the climate, y'all.
Yeah, which is just a control mechanism that has impoverished, by the way, people all over the world, and seeks to impoverish all of us.
It's causing, so trains were halted, traffic lights failed, phone networks. This was, across, across multiple countries. You've never seen anything like this.
You know what else happened across multiple European cities this weekend? Is
that's another thing to bring up. Protesting.
Yes.
You're talking about that against against the immigration. And, that's also a globalist phenomenon.
Right, and I would say that it's more protesting in support of your own national identity. Right. And your own traditions and your culture and your laws and all the things that are built up into that, right? Because most people are not against, immigration in the sense that you're not allowed to immigrate, that nobody must ever move from one country to another.
Right.
That's not, it sounds like that's what people are against, but they're not.
No.
It's, everybody understands that if, like you take in, what is Ellis Island? You take in your poor, you're starving, and so on and so on. So no one's against the concept of immigration. No. What they're against is immigration used as a weapon system to obliterate your nation and everything that goes with that. Your national identity, your culture, your,
our faith,
your rights.
Everything, our traditions. It's and we're seeing what is happening in Europe is a fast forward of what the fear of it happening here in the U.S. and it's quickly escalating
with Islamic immigration.
Right, with Islamic.
Right, whereas in the U.S. we already have an immigration issue.
Right.
It's called 18 to 20 million people came here illegally in the last 4 years.
Yeah.
And now judges and one political party wants to tell you can't remove any of them.
Right.
And by the way, okay, I'm going to raise something here. I'm working on something. I'm going to put this as a question.
Okay.
Why would so many high-level Democrat representatives fly all the way to El Salvador?
This was one of the nuttiest things.
For one man.
Right. One man who was was involved in a significant group
Well, I mean, they said he was an MS-13, but he had he had all the tattoos. They said he wasn't. They said he was a father, and then it turned out he's a stepfather. That turned out to not be his children. But it's just that so many parts of the narrative turned out to be false, and not to say that the principles or the whatever it is that they're standing for that those things don't stand. But my question is, what did that man know? What does he know? That they're so afraid he's telling his interrogators in El Salvador.
Yeah.
I would not be surprised if that man turns out to be connected to something significant that people in power in this country. Because who do you use? Who do they use for their dirty work?
Cartel?
Of course. They use people like that.
Yeah.
They use people like that. Who do you see? You just seen a nightclub that was busted, right? You think politicians didn't know that nightclub was in operation? You think when they need something dirty done, they don't have people that they can call?
Right.
I would not be surprised if that man was tied. Now, I do not have any evidence that I'm willing to put forward at this time, but I will say that I am looking into some interesting things.
Keep digging, girl.
I'm not accusing him. I'm very clear. I'm not accusing him. I'm just saying it's a very natural question. It's odd that so many high-level people rushed over there, and how many have been deported? I mean, that in his group alone, I think was over 160.
Right.
So why only him?
Right.
That's what got me started. Why only him? You're not worried about anybody else. You don't think anybody else has a murky asylum case? You don't think anybody else has kids in the U.S.? You don't think anybody else, you could argue they're, a great dad or a great husband or a great member of the community out of 160 people?
It is.
Because he didn't turn out to be he turned out at least to have significant things counting against him that broke that narrative. I'm not saying he's a bad guy. I don't know him.
Well, going back to, we were talking kind of about the great replacement theory that's called sometimes the cultural replacement, we're seeing...
You mean the invasion, using immigration as a weapon of invasion?
That's the truth.
Turning human beings into a weapon system.
Yeah, weaponizing human beings and illegal immigrants. Do you have that clip of from the UK? Do you have that?
So this is the lady who has a show called Batshit Bonkers in Britain. I love her. I think she's absolutely hilarious. And of course, I lived in London for a number of years. I lived there officially for 10 years, but I left and went to Baghdad for 5. So this is, anyone who knows the UK would appreciate this because she is so British and yet she's so funny and she's so bold. And, this clip this really got me because she is arguing with a Pakistani man on the street. I believe he's Pakistani. He's a Muslim man. And she refers to the UK as a Christian country, and you have to hear what he says.
Are you getting paid for hating on Muslims? Let's talk about it. Let's talk about it.
Islam is so
Let's
great.
talk about
Why
it.
are you in Christian
Let's talk.
countries? Islam is so great. Why are you in my country?
This is not a Christian country, number one. It's a secular country. It is not governed by Christian rules.
Why don't you
It is not governed. You don't speak it. Sorry. No. This is going live on Facebook. Katie, how much are you getting paid? How much are you getting paid for hating on Muslims? How much are you getting paid?
This is not a Christian country. This is not governed by Christian rules. This is a secular country.
Right.
Can you believe that?
I can, because it's we're losing our identity like crazy, like we've been discovering in our interviews and what's happening, and it's very indicative of what's happening. Where if you speak up against your values, your traditions, your faith, you're a bigot.
Yeah.
That's you. They silence people and they cancel them because of these things, and and for them to say this is, that the UK is a secular country.
So how you justify, look what he did there, right? I mean, there's two things about this to me. There's two pillars of this that stand out to me. One pillar is that by saying you're not a Christian country, that means you have no basis to fight for Judeo-Christian values. That means that you can't say, well, this is our tradition, because now you're a secular country, which means what is secular? It's nebulous, right? It has no religious identity. So what does that allow them to do is to say, oh, well, you don't need to celebrate Christmas or Christmas. We don't need to have a Christmas celebration. Why does the Queen, if Britain is not a Christian country, why does the Queen make an address every year, a Christmas address?
Right.
She doesn't make an address for Ramadan, does she? No. She doesn't do one for Shabbat. She doesn't do one for Purim or for Hanukkah, right? She does the Queen, and where do people get married? Where does the royal family get married? They get married in a church.
In a church.
They don't go to a mosque or a synagogue or a Buddhist temple. So what have you done by, and I understand, I had this conversation with my children actually, because I grew up in a very secular country in a way. Like a lot of kids are growing up today where parents don't go to church, and you find out with horror all the crimes that have been committed in the name of Christianity. You learn about the Crusades. You only learn one side of the Crusades, by the way. Yeah. You don't learn the Christians were fighting back. No, you just learn that Christians did evil things in the name of God and religion. And so you're horrified.
Right.
You look at this and you're like, well, I don't want to be a part of that, and you run as fast as you can and as hard as you can. But look what has happened in that vacuum. Nobody tells you that when you walk away from from your faith or from the faith that has defined your civilization, that you're giving up the rights and the freedoms and all those other things that come with it. And people will say, oh, no, you're not. That's not true. Well, just take a look at what they're doing, because they just use that. You're not a Christian country. You're a secular country, which means my religion is just as important as yours. If you can't say that we're defined by our Christian values, then your Christian values have no they have no standing in the discourse. And of course, there's a whole information operation against even talking about Christianity. People being arrested in the UK for praying on the street, but not being arrested for, Muslims not being arrested for praying and so on, right?
Right, exactly. I mean, and it is working, because in the UK, church attendance is down, and they're also, they're saying that 46% in 2021 census show that the Christian population is shrinking.
Yeah.
And secularism and other faiths are rising.
Yeah. And that's not a faith.
Right.
That's nihilism in a sense,
yes,
right?
It is. Yeah.
And I know the philosophers, my son would be rolling his eyes, but it is a kind of nihilism, because of what it believes is when you believe in nothing, you're annihilating faith in God.
Right.
And you're annihilating creation, and you're annihilating our purpose for being here. And by the way, where's the clip that really upsets me? That's the one of the church being burned, and this is happening more and more and more. And this is an indicator. Churches are being burned all over the world. They're being burned in Canada, in the United States, all across Europe, and nobody says a word. Right. So according to this post, this was burned by, and this is in the UK, and the church was burned by 2 Pakistani immigrants, because there's a lot of Pakistani immigrants in the UK. Now, we haven't confirmed that. We were trying to confirm that. So there you go, right? This is reminiscent to me of the end of Trump's term, when he went across Lafayette Park in D.C. And he went to the church, the historic church, and he held up the Bible, and everybody mocked him, and his defense minister and all the senior members of his cabinet that were with him disavowed him publicly, and they created a fake thing about, the protesters in the park had their First Amendment rights impaired because they got pushed out so Trump could do his stunt. What they did not report on was that there were more than 20 churches had been burned in Washington, D.C. over the preceding few weeks. And that was not an accident. That was absolutely by design. So as the churches are burned down across the world, we're not supposed to talk about it. And if we
Exactly.
do, we're Christian nationalists.
Right. We're Christian nationalists. That's a dog whistle term they love to throw out, you know?
And by the way, what opens the door for that? Oh, we're a secular country. We're not a Christian country.
Right. I want to share, if we can end on this, you know, when we get rid of God and specifically, I believe Jesus in society, Paul Harvey, are you familiar with If I Were the Devil?
Yes.
Just
An amazing.
Yeah, it's amazing proclamation and warning from 1965. Can I send it to you, Keith? And maybe we end on this. And
I want to say one thing before we let Paul Harvey close us out.
Yeah.
The chairs we're sitting on, table, everything on this set that was donated to us by an amazing artist, Carol Hicks Bolton, whose life for a long time now, years, has been dedicated to bringing antiques and other artifacts to the United States from Europe and elsewhere.
Mm-hmm.
And why am I talking about this now? Because one of the things that Carol has brought to the United States is the artifacts and the art and the infrastructure of the churches in France.
Wow.
Which she has found, as France has been closing down its churches, they have been saying, well, nobody wants to pay for the upkeep of the church or to keep it alive. The municipalities won't pay for it. So they're shutting the churches down
Right.
and converting them.
And you have a special heart for like beautiful churches. When we were in Panama, you kept pointing out the beautiful, cathedrals.
I love beautiful.
Yeah, churches. I mean, they are very special.
But I also have a special place in my heart for Carol because she is, she started as an artist. She went over there as an artist and she turned into an historian.
Yeah.
Because no one else is really documenting in physical terms. She brought a confessional back to the United States. She brought a pew. She has got Bibles and prayer books. And I went there to her store with a priest who's a liturgic specialist. And he got me to buy, dozens and dozens of books, prayer books, because he was going through them in these different languages. And he says, look how they're changing the language of the prayers.
Right.
This is revolutionary theology. So all of this history is being lost, and Christians are not speaking up.
Right.
Can't expect other faiths to stand for your faith, but so many people are turning their backs on God.
Right.
And so guess what you get when you do that? Guess who's not turning their backs on God? Guess whose numbers are not in decline? Islam. Yeah. It's the fastest growing religion on earth still.
Yeah.
And there was another clip. We'll go to Paul Harvey now, so we don't have to show it, but people can find it. There was another clip I think it was in Denmark,
right,
where a Danish guy was arguing with a Muslim guy, and the Muslim guy says to him, "Well, we're just going to outnumber you. We're going to outbreed you and outnumber you."
There's a greater plan.
Niall Ferguson wrote about this more than a decade ago.
Right.
He's married to Hirsi Ali.
Okay.
Alan Hirsi Ali, I think, I don't know how to say it. She's a wonderful, amazing woman that I know. And her husband, Niall Ferguson, wrote about this. You can look up his books. I would urge people to read that.
Yeah.
It's just a breeding program. Look at Israel. The Palestinians will outnumber the Israelis in not too, distant a future. So the same thing can be said here and all over the world.
Yeah.
And
I think going back to nihilistic or humanist
Ayan Hirsi Ali, that's it.
What we're doing is, what I think the globalists want, they want the creation celebrated more than the creator. And so when you do that, then it becomes about you. You can be your own God. You can have your own, all these. You
can block out the sun like Bill Gates.
You can play God.
You can alter people's DNA with mRNA.
Yeah, you can deceive. You can do whatever.
You can change your gender.
Yeah, and survival of the fittest.
Instead of being as God created you.
Exactly. And that's what we're very well, as I do, that we're living in a spiritual battle, in a war for our soul. And that's where God wants us, or Satan wants us to take the eye off the ball, which is that he is the creator and we were uniquely created. We didn't come from pond scum. And evolving means giving up your
test tube.
But evolving, like going back to our identity, evolving is like, I can be whoever I want, or we need to celebrate every nationality and every race and like have a one world, and in the name of the greater good. But there's a deception with that, and that's why they call him the great deceiver. So prophetically, Paul Harvey put this out in 65, but it rings truer than ever today. And I've listened to this multiple times in the last 4 years, but listen to it. We'll do a reaction after.
If I were the devil, if I were the devil, if I were the prince of darkness, I'd want to engulf the whole world in darkness, and I'd have a third of its real estate and 4/5 of its population, but I wouldn't be happy until I had seized the ripest apple on the tree, thee. So I'd set about, however necessary, to take over the United States. I'd subvert the churches first. I'd begin with a campaign of whispers. With the wisdom of a serpent, I would whisper to you as I whispered to Eve, do as you please. To the young, I would whisper that the Bible is a myth. I would convince them that man created God instead of the other way around. I would confide that what's bad is good and what's good is square. And the old, I would teach to pray after me, Our Father, which art in Washington. And then I'd get organized. I'd educate authors in how to make lurid literature exciting so that anything else would appear dull and uninteresting. I'd threaten TV with dirtier movies and vice versa. I'd peddle narcotics to whom I could. I'd sell alcohol to ladies and gentlemen of distinction. I'd tranquilize the rest with pills. If I were the devil, I'd soon have families at war with themselves, churches at war with themselves, and nations at war with themselves, until each in its turn was consumed. And with promises of higher ratings, I'd have mesmerizing media fanning the flames. If I were the devil, I would encourage schools to refine young intellects, but neglect to discipline emotions. Just let those run wild. Until before you knew it, you'd have to have drug-sniffing dogs and metal detectors at every schoolhouse door. Within a decade, I'd have prisons overflowing. I'd have judges promoting pornography. Soon I could evict God from the courthouse, then from the schoolhouse, and then from the houses of Congress. And in his own churches, I would substitute psychology for religion and deify science. I would lure priests and pastors into misusing boys and girls and church money. If I were the devil, I'd make the symbol of Easter an egg and the symbol of Christmas a bottle. If I were the devil, I'd take from those who have and give to those who wanted, until I had killed the incentive of the ambitious. And what'll you bet? I couldn't get whole states to promote gambling as the way to get rich. I would caution against extremes in hard work, in patriotism, in moral conduct. I would convince the young that marriage is old-fashioned, that swinging is more fun, that what you see on TV is the way to be. And thus I could undress you in public, and I could lure you into bed with diseases for which there is no cure. In other words, if I were the devil, I'd just keep right on doing what he's doing.
Amazing. What year was that?
1965.
1965. What do you think?
I just think it's a example of what was coming, and we're there. You know, we're seeing the result of all that playing out, and that's why we hope and pray that there can be a great revival, and you know, coming back to God and being bold and loud. You know, because
Keith, do you want to say anything?
Yeah, Keith.
Well, yeah, I mean, it's stunning, the detail that he goes into, and you can, you know, I was just as an video editor, envisioning like, oh, I'd know what exact stories we could pull up that would demonstrate each one of these points. If we had time, we could do that. But I mean, yeah, I mean, it plays out.
He even talks about HIV, right? Diseases for which there is no cure, you know? 1965.
1965. And just patriotism is, I mean, is
there's not a thing he was wrong about.
And right is wrong, and wrong is right, and
right is
doing
square.
good is square. Yeah.
Yeah.
So
yeah, and when he says how he'd make books lurid so that everything else was dull and uninteresting.
Right.
Right. And convince people that marriage is boring and swinging was more fun.
Mm-hmm. I mean, we talked about the culture of just the hookup culture and
just let people do as they please.
Do as they please.
Yeah,
that comes
which is
from the Satanic Bible.
And is the mantra of today.
It is. A secular world. Yeah. And step on anybody on their way, like the survival of the fittest, you know, and, you know, it really is putting science in the creation over the creator, you know.
I love to go back in time with those with those kind of things because they're free of the politics of today. You know, they're unfettered, right? The truth can just stand. That's it. It's like, you know, if Joe Rogan said it, someone would say something about Joe Rogan. If it was, you know,
Fanning
Rachel
the flames of media.
If it was Rachel Maddow saying it, people would respond to Rachel Maddow. But you lose the substance of what's being said. But when you hear it like that, you know, and nobody knows what Paul Harvey's politics were. And so, you know, you can just hear it, and the truth stands on its own. Everything they've done to suppress it, but it's now, you know, it's just becoming clearer and clearer every day. Well, that's it. Thank you so much for joining us. Please like, share, subscribe, donate, support us, support independent journalism. Do whatever you can. Get as many people as possible to go rogue with all of us. We love having you. We love being able to speak directly to you. We are going to be looking for your comments and your thoughts. That's
But
great.
also, if you haven't checked out all our episodes, go back to our YouTube page, subscribe, and check out our old episodes that we're now 13 in. Many more great ones to come. So spread the word.
Keith, Rebecca, Luke,
Yeah.
Allison,
Yeah.
Ryan, and Lara.
That's right.
Yeah,
we
that's
have
our
a small
team.
but bold warriors, team of warriors. Committed to telling great stories and getting out the truth. So thanks for joining us.
And don't forget, hold your breath, wait for Going Rogue on the road.
On the road,
In Panama. A
edition.
special week of coverage coming up, courtesy of our partners at the Gateway Pundit, Jim and Joe Hoft, who without whom that trip would not have been possible. Yep.
It was a great one.
Yes.
A lot of good information coming.
Stay tuned.